Frost DK is absolutely starting to take over the ladder. You want to be able to fight against him? I've got a way that you can do just that with Blood Death Knight. It's actually going to be the 40 card version. But in order to help you out with the matchup, we really have to understand what exactly it is our opponent is trying to do, and then we understand what we need to do to be able to play against it. So I'm actually going to hop into the Frost DK list here. DK, also actually short for donkey. So this is going to be the Frost Donkey list. And, we're just going to kind of ignore the fact that we're also playing DK ourselves. We're not playing DK, we might as well just call it Control. Taking a look at the Frost Donkey list here, though. We really, again, just trying to understand the game plan that our opponent's trying to execute. So you've probably played against it, and what you've seen is that our opponent is really wanting to hit the board early. Reasonably, with 8 1-drops in the deck, we can expect that our opponent is going to have a turn 1 play. So we know they're going to be getting on the board early. Of course, Foul Egg is an extremely powerful card, at least within this deck. If you see Foul Egg come down on turn 1, you know that it's going to be a tough matchup because our opponent is going to be coming after us really, really quickly, with a lot of nice sized minions on the board, considering it's going to be in the early turns of the game. And of course, the other thing that we're really afraid of is Construct Quarter. If your opponent's on the coin and they go turn 1 Egg into turn 2 Construct Quarter, again, you're just not going to be having a very good time fighting against this deck. Construct Quarter, actually the card that makes the deck so strong. The 4/5s with Rush absolutely dominate the board in the early game, and 4 damage going face is actually a lot of damage if it gets to hit you for multiple turns. So once again, we find ourselves in a situation where the developers have given us 4/5s on the board in the early game. I feel like we've seen this before. I know that we have. But our opponent hitting the board early with the 1-drops, likely on turn 2, you're going to see in a lot of situations they may actually have to hero power if they're not on the coin. If they get down Harbinger of Winter, that's going to be their best turn 2 play. They get this down, it's a minion, it's a body, and then it's also going to draw an additional card out of their deck. They could potentially have Frost Strike. That doesn't really mean a whole lot to us with the deck that we're going to be playing. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But really, removal not coming into play so much. It's really more of like a Discover card in the matchup and for the Frost Donkey deck especially. And likely, they're just going to be discovering, really good cards just because so many of the Frost cards are actually good. And so their game plan progresses from there. They're just continuously putting minions on the board. And then those minions, of course, when they die, are going to generate corpses, and all the corpses are going to fuel the Marrow Manipulators here. So what happens a lot of times is our opponent has a board, and we're working as hard as we can to remove that board. And this is probably universally true whether you're playing the Blood Death Knight deck that I'm featuring here, or if you're playing something else. Removing our opponent's minions is something that we want to do because they want to put minions on the board, they want to punch us in the face to soften us up. So by the time they get to the turns where they're able to play something like a Marrow Manipulator, they likely have minions on the board, and they can remove our side of the board. So they'll still have minions. They use those minions to potentially remove our side of the board, and then they play this Marrow Manipulator that's going to shoot us in the face for 10 damage realistically, is what it feels like it happens a lot of times. And now the deck is also starting to run Bran Bronzebeard, which means they can play Bran Marrow Manipulator. Potentially it could do as much as 20 damage. They may not have that many corpses, but in a lot of games they are going to have that many corpses to be able to shoot this damage directly into our face. And with no minions on the board, the damage has nowhere else to go. We're taking a ton of damage. And keeping in mind that with the Horn of Winter, they can go Bran Horn of Winter into Marrow Manipulator as early as turn 7. So we have to keep in mind continuously our health total and how much damage our opponent is going to be able to do next turn. Otherwise, you're going to get hit potentially with like a surprise lethal just because of all the damage coming out of hand. One more thing to keep in mind with this deck, with the addition of Bran, they're also starting to run Astalor now. And so again, they could actually play Bran Horn of Winter and the 8-mana version of Astalor that's going to get the battle cry twice. That's going to mean 14 damage. Again, we're likely expecting that we don't have a board or we have a small board, and most of that damage is going to go face. So we really want to try to keep our health total, as close to 30 and above as possible. And depending on the board state, it may need to be higher than that just to ensure that we can survive. If you can weather those 2 big bursts of damage, though, it goes a really long way to be able to win the matchup. Keeping in mind also they do have some direct damage in the form of Frostworm's Fury, being able to freeze our side of the board, hit us for 5, and generate a 5/5. If that 5/5 is allowed to hit face, then again, you know, it's just damage that really starts to add up over time. Then, of course, the rest of the deck is likely what you've already seen. The inclusion of Bran, though, again, we don't want to ever tunnel vision our own game plan. We don't want to tunnel vision what our opponent can do as well. So with the Bran, there's lots of other cards that they can utilize with it. Could be School Teacher and the Noggling that comes along with it. They could utilize Bran with Nerubian Vizier to get 2 discounted spells. Even, you know, just smaller things like Bran Thessarian for the extra battle cry there, as well as Chill Fallen Baron maybe for a little bit of extra card draw. So the deck it's really just extremely powerful. It hits the board early, it punches us in the face, gets us low, and they're able to kill us with big finishers in the form of Marrow Manipulator and Astalor Bloodsworn. So keeping all those things in mind, now we're going to hop over and take a look at the Blood DK deck and see how we can fight against our opponent's game plan. So here's our Blood Death Knight deck that we're going to take into battle against these Frost Donkeys. And you're going to see right off the bat, we're running 6 1-drops in this particular version of the deck. I don't think you need 6 1-drops, but they all kind of have their own little things that make them good. So there are body baggers here. Body bagger, gain a corpse, as well as the corpse that you're going to get when the body dies is good just to be able to fuel corpse explosion. I find a lot of times turn 4 on the coin or turn 5, you're really looking for something to be able to clear our opponent's side of the board. They could have 2, 3, even 4 minions on the board, and possibly 1 or 2 of those minions could be the 4/5s that are coming off of Construct Quarter. We're going to want to get those off the board and preserve our health total absolutely as much as possible. So body baggers, if you feel like there's something you need to cut, I feel like you could absolutely cut both copies to be able to fit in something else. But for right now, this feels like it's good enough to actually make the cut. We're running foul legs of our own here, and the only way that we ever really proc our foul leg is with our copy of Construct Quarter. This card is insanely good in every Death Knight deck. There's really no reason to not run it in Blood. So if we can get the foul leg Construct Quarter start, then we're going to be in good shape to be able to fight against our opponent's board. So with the minions that we're putting on the board early, it's important to keep in mind we are prioritizing trading minions. Face damage against the Frost Donkey absolutely doesn't matter. We just want to make sure that they're not dealing damage to us because our plan is to actually frustrate and outlast our opponents. It's not a game plan that I'm really in favor of, but when there's a deck as strong as Frost Donkey has proven to be, then we have to do that which must not be done, which is actually playing a Renathal control deck. So they've really pushed me to the limit personally here. I'm digging way down and doing things that I wouldn't normally do to be able to fight against it. Also, you know, you can keep in mind that Foul Leg potentially is going to have a little bit of synergy with Corpse Explosion. You can create a couple of extra corpses if it's on the board when you play the Corpse Explosion, maybe to get to that 5, 6 corpses that you're going to need to be able to clear your opponent's board entirely. And then, of course, also, if you're able to drop down a Foul Leg when you lay down the Soul Stealer, then again, it's going to put an extra 3/3 on the board. So just a couple of things to keep in mind there. Mistress of Mixtures in the deck, it's a little bit of healing. It's a 1-drop. So, you know, it does pretty well. Potentially, we could take a value trade against like the 1/2 arms dealer, or, you know, even just soften up a minion and finish it off with a hero power. Going to be a couple of different uses here, but it makes the cut and it's going to heal us for 4. The healing, pretty important here. So that's going to be our 6 1-drops. One note here, please, please do not ever keep these 1-drops in your mulligan. As this Blood Death Knight deck, if you are keeping any of these 3 cards in your mulligan, you have now become the donkey. Do not be the donkey. Moving on, we've got Amalgams. It's just Discover. It gives us another minion. Ideally, you want to be able to discover off of an undead minion, keeping in mind that your hero power gives an undead minion. Lots of the undead stuff is pretty good here. You know, you could potentially hit things like Gnome Muncher or maybe a Sylvanas if you need a spot removal on a big minion that's on the board. You could also potentially discover like a Nerubian Vizier. So undead is going to be your best bet. Sometimes you may just want to put the 2/3 on the board, having the body on the board to get another corpse for a Corpse Explosion. But just keep in mind, you'll be discovering Nagas. They're significantly worse than undead. So ideally, we want to discover undeads. It's just additional resource generation. If you have this in your hand on turn 2, just play it. Even if you don't have a minion on the board, just get it down. The 2/3 can trade. It can attack something. It can absorb damage from our opponent in some way that prevents it from going face. We're also playing Astalor Bloodsworn here, so mostly with the deck, what I'm finding is that a lot of people are playing Frost Death Knight, or Frost Donkey, as I've been calling it, but there are other people out there who are maybe playing like Blood Death Knight, some form of Control Paladin, or Control Warrior, and so those are the matchups where Astalor Bloodsworn is going to come in really good against Frost DK in particular. You know, you can use it for a little bit of removal, and then armor gain on turn 5, and then maybe even use the 8-mana version of Astalor for like some kind of a board clear, if it's turn 10 plus, just because the amount of damage that comes out of it will likely clear a lot of boards. In my experience, that damage doesn't tend to go face when there's a lot of minions still on the board. So Astalor, definitely in the deck. Hematurge, long-standing Blood Death Knight card. It's Discover. It's a 2/3. Again, if it's turn 2, even if you don't have a corpse, you're going to throw this down against Frost Death Knight. We don't want a Tunnel Vision getting use out of the Battle Cry. We just need minions on the board to be able to fight. And again, I can't overstate the importance of getting corpses in case we draw into something like a Corpse Explosion. Vampiric Blood is just healing. Again, none of these cards we would actually want to keep in the mulligan, but when you draw this, if you have the corpses, then you're going to want to use this to be able to gain 10 health, draw a card. One thing to keep in mind here, with the Vampiric Blood, you don't necessarily want to play it and use up 3 corpses if you have a Corpse Explosion in hand, or if you know that you might need a Corpse Explosion and you could potentially draw one. That's just going to fall into the playing to your outs category. We need to make sure we have enough corpses in our Corpse Explosion to be able to clear the board, which is typically going to be around the 5 to 6 range against Frost Death Knight, just because that's the amount of health that those minions are going to have. We play Bran of our own, lots of different Battlecry minions in the deck. Again, we do not keep this in the mulligan. Baron is just a little bit of card draw. Again, not a keep in the mulligan. Construct Quarter, we actually do keep. This is absolutely 100% a keep. Doesn't matter whether you're going first or going second. Keep this card. Being able to get our 4/5s on the board to be able to fight against what our opponent is trying to do is just insanely strong. So Construct Quarter, absolutely keep it in the mulligan. Vizier, this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting when we're analyzing what we're doing with the deck. So the Vizier gives us the ability to be able to discover cards. Ideally, we want to be able to discover the cheaper version. So if we have an undead die the previous turn, we get the cheaper version of the card. And you can see we are running a lot of undead stuff throughout the deck here. But what do we want to discover? So first of all, we're looking for healing. We need to keep our health total high because we've already talked about the amount of burst damage that these Frost Death Knights can actually do. Second, we would look for removal. That would be things like Asphyxiate, and maybe in rare cases, depending on your options, it might mean Obliterate. Obliterate does deal 3 damage to us, of course, when we play it, but it does remove a minion from our opponent's side of the board, so better to take 3 from Obliterate, removing the 4/5 that's going to be coming off of the Construct Quarter, than to take 4 from the minion itself. But you really want to prioritize what you're going to discover here. In control matchups, again, it's going to be totally different. You might be looking to discover like an additional win condition, maybe something like Sunwell, or potentially something like the Scourge, if you're needing some extra value. But again, we're focused on Frost DKs here. Those are the type of things that we want to discover. Same thing with Venomous Scorpid. We want to prioritize healing and then removal. Again, and that's going to be things like Corpse Explosion. It could be something like a Blood Boil, Death Strike. These are all going to be great options. And then kind of the fallback options are going to be things like Asphyxiate and Obliterate, if that's the case. And in some cases, maybe even Heart Strike is good enough. Deal 3 and generate a corpse could be good if it's able, the best option that you're able to get. But we don't want to be taking like big, costly spells that aren't going to do a whole lot as far as healing and removing our opponent's side of the board. 2 copies of Death Strike. This card is just really good. Sometimes you're going to need to use it against the 4/5s that are coming off of the Construct Quarter. It's also going to be a really good answer to the minion that comes off of Frostworm's Fury, the 5/5, and Overseer Frigidera, the 5/6. It's going to remove those, and importantly, it's also going to heal us for 6, which is potentially really good. Again, we're going to have to heal a lot if we're going to be able to beat those Frost Donkeys because of all the damage that they're going to be doing. We got the School Teacher here, and again, on the Discovery, you're going to be looking for things like Asphyxiate, Obliterate, and Heart Strike. Again, just looking for removal. Could also potentially find another copy of Vampiric Blood, but again, if that's going to be your choice, make sure that you're careful with the number of corpses that you have. Early in the game, it's hard to justify playing Vampiric Blood or the Noggling that has a Vampiric Blood attached to it, just because we need to make sure we have corpses for Corpse Explosion. But as you get into the mid-game and later, you're going to have plenty of corpses to be able to do it all. So those are the options that we're really going to want to look for off of the School Teacher here. Blood Boil, of course, this is going to be healing and removal. So the interesting thing about Frost Donkey is that the minions that they're playing, almost all of them are going to have more than 2 health. So we can play the Blood Boil, but it's going to take 2 turns to be able to kill off those minions in a lot of cases. Maybe we can get a little bit of damage from minions that we have on the board that are left over. And of course, we have the hero power that could deal 1 damage to be able to set up those kills. So really, that just kinds of mitigates damage. It's not necessarily going to clear the board and totally heal us up, although there will be some cases. I tend to keep Blood Boil in the mulligan because if you find yourself going into turn 5 with no Blood Boil and no Corpse Explosion, I feel like those are the games that I'm actually losing. So I'm keeping Blood Boil and I'm keeping Corpse Explosion. I feel like I've already talked about Explosion fairly extensively. I think you get the idea there. We've got 2 copies of Famished Fool here. It just makes a lot of sense in Death Knight. It's going to be good card draw. And they're easy to infuse just because of the amount of corpses. And then our hero power is also generating... well, not necessarily corpses, but able to infuse this card once it's in your hand, so important to keep in mind. Null Muncher here, I wouldn't keep this in the mulligan either. Anything down here is just going to be too expensive, but it's a taunt, it's healing, and in a lot of cases, our opponent's going to have to go through it the hard way, which means we're going to get the initial heal from the turn we play it, and then it's also, you know, maybe like a 50-50 that our opponent actually has to attack into it with a minion or with a weapon swing, and we'll be able to heal potentially for 10. So guaranteed 5 healing, sometimes 10. Or our opponents, if they've created some type of direct damage spell, if it goes into removing our minion rather than our face, then that's like healing. It increases our effective health pool, so that's going to be good as well. Sylvanas, again, this is just like big minion spot removal. If there's a 4-5 on the board, a Frigidera, likely you're not going to want to be playing this on turn 6 unless there's only 1 minion on the board that we really need to remove. And likely you're never going to have this infused, at least in this Frost DK matchup, unless it's been in your hand all game, which would actually be bad because you don't want this in your hand all game. So really just removal here, and then of course it's going to have additional uses in the other matchups if we're up against other decks that aren't Frost Donkey. Mograine, just a little bit of a win condition, so we don't ever really want to play this card against Frost Donkey. There's going to be games where you can play it, and you can get this down, and it puts your opponent on a clock. So Frost Death Knight is actually comfortable with these very, very long games. They can draw them out because they're going to have the Bran Marrow Manipulator combo, or they're going to have the Bran Astalor combo to be able to do a lot of damage. So Frost Death Knight, they're comfortable playing these long games. Sometimes we have a window to be able to get this down where we're not going to be taking too much damage off of our opponent, and then we put them on a clock, and you can measure that. I like to keep it in mind. Okay, my opponent now has 6 turns to be able to kill me. We put our opponent on the clock. We know that they don't have any healing, and it kind of forces them to maybe rush their game plan a little bit, which can be advantageous for us. But most of the time, you're not going to want to play this because there's not going to be time, and it's just a little bit too slow to be able to kill them, because if you put your opponent on a 5 or 6 turn clock with a deck that's as lethal as Frost Death Knight is, you know, it doesn't necessarily do a whole lot, but it's important to keep in mind. Patchwork here, it's removal, you know, being able to remove a minion. Again, if your opponent only has 1 big minion on the board, you play this, you remove that minion, you take something out of their hand and their deck, then maybe you can hit something good like the Bran, like the Marrow Manipulator, like the Astalor. So again, it's a little bit expensive. There are going to be situations where we can get this down though, and it's going to make the game a little bit easier. And then we're rounding out the deck here with the Soul Stealer. So again, this is just a board clear. Probably the worst mistake that you can make against Frost Death Knight, really with any deck, is just taking way too much damage. So we're probably going to be a little bit liberal with how we're going to use our Soul Stealers. We just want to clear the board, and it puts a 5/5. So you can imagine by the time we're able to play this for 8 mana, our opponent's going to be thinking about the Marrow Manipulator for big damage. Maybe they're thinking about playing the Astalor for big damage. So we clear their side of the board, and then we get down a 5/5 here that's going to soak up some of that damage. It's going to be coming out of our opponent's really powerful turns with the Manipulator, with the Astalor. And it just keeps that damage from going into our face. So board clear and put down a 5/5 is good for us. Now they don't have a board to be able to remove our board so that all of that damage goes face. So important things to keep in mind there. We need to fight for the board. We need to remove as much, if not everything on the board that we possibly can. We need to keep our health total high. Very, very important. And then we just need to keep in mind that our opponent is going to have these really, really powerful turns with the Marrow Manipulator, with the Astalor. They're going to be coming down a little bit earlier than you think they will, because we know that they're running Horn of Winter. So if you're able to keep all of those things in mind as you execute your game plan against the Frost Death Knight, you're going to stand a much, much better chance of being able to win that matchup.